Alright y'all, we're going to be doing something interesting today with this deer behind me that I shot yesterday. Before I quarter out and process and package the meat, I'm going to trim the fat off this deer. I haven't seen a whole lot of people doing anything with deer fat. Usually it's not eaten, it's real waxy. People say it tastes bad, it really doesn't. It's just fat, but it's real waxy. So what I'm going to be doing in this video is show you all how to render out the fat and turn it into soap. What we're going to be doing is trimming all the chunks of fat. This deer's got a pretty good amount of fat on it. If you're up north, probably all of your deer have got a lot of fat on them. I'm down here in Tennessee, so I finally got a deer that has a good amount of fat on it, so I'm going to show you all what I do. So we're going to take our knife and start with the easy parts. This chunk in front of the hind quarter is pretty easy to separate. Just want to follow the muscle on the actual ham. Just kind of follow it down. Try not to cut into the meat. It's going to come off in several pieces, but alright. So we're going to do this to the rest of the deer. We're just going to carefully trim. Try not to cut into the meat too much. Carefully trim all the fat off. Alright, so I've got most of the fat trimmed off, shaved and carved off the outside of the deer. You see I missed a couple spots. It gets to the point where there's just little bits and pieces that aren't worth trimming, but we got the bulk of it. Matter of fact, we overfilled this bowl full of fat. So, doing pretty good. Now we're going to go to the interior fat. Now the fat on the inside of the deer, especially around the kidneys and the tenderloins, I like to separate this out because it's a different type of fat and it's so hard and waxy. I will make candles out of it. Whenever you're trimming fat, watch out for lymph nodes or anything off color. If there's a little gray mass inside the fat, trim that out. You don't want that in there. The inside fat is very waxy. I'm going to separate this out because I will use it for different things. So your interior fat, the fat from inside the deer around the guts, it's probably going to be kind of bloody. So take this and wash it off under cold water. Make sure you get all that blood and impurities out. We just want as much pure fat as possible without any blood or meat or lymph nodes, any kind of other nasty stuff in there. So while you're trimming the meat off your fat, probably good to do this on a cutting board, but cut it into smaller chunks. When we render it out, it will render a lot faster if you cut it into smaller pieces. So I go for like 1-inch square pieces, give or take. Alright, I got everything cubed up. The inside fat from the guts, from around the kidneys, I'm going to put that in the freezer for another project. So, looks like this pot might be a little too small. We're going to go ahead and light this up and start it at a low heat to start melting the fat. Turn that heat down. You don't want to burn it. Now, as this melts, we want to stir it. We don't want it to burn on the bottom. Alright, now you can see it is submerged in fat, so we don't have to stir as often, but you still do want to stir it every now and again. Keep it from burning on the bottom. Keep everything nice and mixed up. Alright y'all, it's quit bubbling. The chunks are getting crispy. Cut the heat off so we don't burn it. Let her cool down here for a second. Alright, so I got this pot, the pot I was going to originally use. Got some cheesecloth fastened around the top of the pot with a piece of wire. You can also use a strainer, whatever. This cheesecloth is folded twice, so it's 4 layers thick. And we're going to take our fat and all of the cracklings and pour it through the cheesecloth. Now we're going to let that sit there for 10 or 15 minutes and cool down and drain, because there's still fat in these chunks here, and we're going to squeeze that out, but it's too hot to handle right now, so we'll let it sit there and drain for a while. You don't have to wear gloves, but it's a little easier than washing a bunch of fat off your hands. So we're just going to squeeze this. It's still pretty hot. Alright, we're going to let this cool off a little bit more. It's still pretty hot. Alright. I'm going to squeeze as much fat out of this as we can. Alright, now we're going to add some water. We're going to boil it for a few minutes. This will help to separate out any particles or impurities in the fat. Alright, so keep the heat very low and only boil it for a few minutes, because the fat will tend to bubble over and make a mess and possibly start a grease fire. So we're going to let this cool down here for a while. Let it get down close to room temperature, and then put it in the fridge once it's cooled off, so it'll get extra cold and that fat will solidify rock solid. Alright, it has sat in the fridge actually overnight. Let's see if I can break this loose. Alright, I got it out of the pot. I would recommend letting it freeze in a bowl rather than a pot, because this was kind of difficult to remove. Notice there's some discoloration here where this is the bottom, this is where the water was underneath it, and there's some discoloration. We're just going to scrape all that off, so we have pure white fat. And this is why I like to set it in water, so it helps to separate out the grime. Well, my scale quit working, so I don't know what it weighs, but it's over 5 pounds of pure solid fat right there. Okay, so we got this block of tallow, and I'm not going to use it all at once, so we're going to break it, I guess. We're going to break a good chunk off of it. Oh, nice. So you keep it in the fridge, it gets real hard, and it breaks easily. I'm going to maybe break this into 2 pieces. I'm going to put it in a pot on this electric stove and melt it down. Alright, so while that's melting, we'll get our other ingredients and supplies ready. You need a kitchen scale that will weigh in ounces and preferably grams. We want to get this as precise as possible. You will need a container for mixing the lye. It's got to be temperature safe and non-reactive. I've tried with a aluminum cup, and the lye actually started to dissolve the aluminum, so I had to chuck the whole thing. You will need some 100% lye. This crystal drain opener I got at Tractor Supply. There's a couple different brands you can buy. Just make sure it says 100% lye, nothing else, because everything's measured by weight. So we need to make sure we're using 100% pure lye. You will need a bowl to mix your ingredients and an immersion blender. Now, last year when I made soap, I used a whisk and it worked fine. But all the soap making videos I watched and everything I read, people all use immersion blenders, so we're going to be using that this time. And this is optional, but if you want to, you can put some fragrance in there. So I'm going to be putting those in just to make it smell nice. If you want to go for a scent-free soap for hunting or whatever, just mix your lye water mixture in and just make plain old soap. Last but not least, you will need silicone soap molds. Now you could probably pour everything into a big tray and then cut it into bars. I got these for cheap from Hobby Lobby, so they work fine. When our mixture gets to a certain point, we need to pour it right away. So we'll have these laid out and ready. Also, I find it useful to use a little bit of wax paper. I also need to mention eye protection. I don't have safety glasses on hand right now, so I just grabbed a pair of sunglasses. I feel like it needs to be mentioned when we're mixing the lye. If any of it splashes on you, it's highly corrosive. Definitely don't want it in your eyes. Probably want to wear rubber gloves too. I might just go with the safety squints, but do as I say, not as I do, because this stuff is very corrosive. Okay, our tallow's melted. We want it to be at least 100 degrees Fahrenheit. It's actually a little too hot. Cut that heat off. We're going to let it cool down. While this tallow is cooling down, let's take a moment to skim off the foam impurities. This is not necessary, but I feel like it'd be a little better without the foam. Okay, our tallow is cooling off nicely. We're going to go ahead and zero this scale with the bowl on it. It's 9.7 ounces. We're going to switch it over to grams to be extra precise. We are at 1066 grams, so we're going to write this down on a note. We're going to keep track of this, 1066 grams. Now, I use this lye calculator I found online. I will have a link in the video description. It also has a fragrance calculator, but I just eyeball the fragrance. It lets you choose the type of fat, or sorry, the type of soap. And we're doing solid soap. Super fatting level. Super fat is the amount of leftover fat that does not get converted into soap. So if you use less lye, you have more super fat, which is good for your skin. So we're going to go with 6% super fat. Okay, ingredients. We are going to go with beef tallow because it's the closest thing to deer. And we are at 1066 grams. Hit next. Solid soap measured in grams with 6% superfat. We need 140.29 grams of lye and 313.71 grams of liquid. We're going to write these down. So there's our measurements. That's all we need from the calculator. I'll just write it down to make sure I have it all in front of me. Now for measuring the lye and water, we're going to use these little plastic cups. But do not mix it in the Dixie cup like that. It gets very hot when the lye reacts with the water and it will melt the cup. So we got it zeroed at 0 grams. We're going to go measure our water first. 313.7. It's not going to hold it, is it? This cup's not big enough. So we had to use 2 cups. But that's good. That's okay. I can already tell this mug is not going to cut it. We'll get a bigger container. Make sure we don't spill any, because this is measured very precisely. Got our scale zeroed. We need 140 grams of lye. Now, this is where you got to be careful, because once you mix these, it becomes hot and very corrosive. So wear eye protection, gloves. I'm obviously not. I live life on the edge. We're going to mix it till it dissolves. Don't breathe the steam in. It's a little bit harsh. Notice the water is a milky color. We want to let this sit and cool down until the water runs clear. So while our lye mixture is doing its thing and cooling down, we're going to check the temperature on our tallow. And it looks like we are in the 140s, so still a little hotter than it should be. I'd like it to drop below 120, 125. So we'll let this cool off more. While the lye does its thing, the lye needs to cool off a little bit too. Alright, our temperatures are both combined around 125 degrees or so. So we're going to take our lye water mixture and carefully pour it into the fat. You'll rinse this out. You'll pulse it on low. Keep it down, keep it submerged so you don't slosh your mixture. Notice how it's all emulsified, but it's still very liquid. Here, once it starts to thicken up like cake batter, that's when we're going to add our fragrance. So keep pulsing it, mixing it until it starts to thicken. When the mixture starts to thicken, it has achieved trace, as they call it, which basically means it is ready to be molded or poured, whatever. We don't want it to reach full trace because it'll have the consistency of pudding and it's hard to pour in the molds, but we want it to start to thicken up like cake batter. Okay, it's turning into a cake batter consistency. See how it's starting to thicken up? And it will continue to get thicker, so we're going to work quickly here. Again, that website I have a link to has a fragrance calculator. I just kind of eyeball it. Alright, now let's blend them in and pour the molds. Notice how much it's thickened up since I put the blender down. Alright, I'm going to go ahead and say our mixture is done. Alright, we're going to pour our molds very carefully. It helps to push some into the corners before you fill it all the way up if the mixture is thick. That way you don't have air bubbles. Take this spatula and kind of level everything out. I actually overfilled these a little bit, but we can skim the excess off or leave it as is. Alright, I got some paper towels lined up here at the end so we can just scrape off the excess. Now we get our wax paper. Lay it across the top. We're going to cover it in a towel. This will help slow down the cooling process. And we're going to let this sit until tomorrow. So overnight, let it harden up, set up, so we can remove the molds. Alright, so we've let the soap sit for a day. At least let it sit overnight so it'll get nice and hardened up. And we take it out of the mold. Easier with two hands, I'm holding the camera, but what we're going to do is take these out and set them on a rack to cure. So there's still water content in the soap, and we want to make sure all the lye is finished reacting with the fat, basically turning it into soap. We want to make sure there's no leftover lye, so we're going to give it, I've given them a couple days and the soap was fine, but most people say 4 to 6 weeks to let them cure. That also lets all the moisture evaporate out of them, but I'll start using them within a couple days. Honestly, these right here are probably ready to use, but we're gonna set them on a rack. Alright, so I got them out on this rack here, and they'll just sit here for at least a few days, probably a few weeks. It's been about 3 days. I've actually gave a couple of these away already. They will continue to sit on this rack and dry, but they're already starting to shrink up just a little bit. You just leave them out in the open air for a few weeks to make sure all that moisture can get out, and they'll last a long time. So this is just basic, regular old lye soap, plus a little bit of fragrance. Nothing special about it other than the fact that it came from a pretty nice buck that I shot this past season. So I thought y'all might enjoy that. Any of y'all still out there hunting, if you get a really fat deer, maybe give it a shot. It's pretty easy to do. Takes a couple days of work, but the end result is pretty cool.